The breakup. Mike stood in the doorway of what was once his living room. Now the house felt alien, each familiar object stripped of warmth, every echo of laughter replaced by a heavy silence. The dusk light leaked through the blinds, painting tired stripes across the hardwood floor, and for a moment he just stood there, gripping the set of car keys so tightly it dug half-moons into his palm. He tried to remember when everything began to unravel. Was it the arguments over little things, or the way Jessica's eyes turned distant, cold as marble? Their love, once fierce and easy, had eroded, ground down by words neither could take back. The papers were signed this morning, the lawyers recycling the same empty reassurances, Jessica refusing to meet his eyes. "It's for the best," she'd murmured, lips pressed together so tightly her cheekbones sharpened. And yet, here in this moment, surrounded by the ghosts of birthdays, pillow fights and late-night confessions, the best felt like a punchline to a cruel joke. The house was nearly empty now. Jessica had already moved most of her things. What remained seemed mocking in its banality. A stray coffee mug, a faded Superman t-shirt Tommy once wore, a family photo still absurdly smiling from the mantel. He crossed the floor and picked up the photo, thumb brushing the glass. He and Jessica, barely out of college, arms around each other, Tommy giggling between them. Mike felt a tightness in his throat, the onset of tears he refused to shed. "Men don't cry," his father's voice chided somewhere deep in his memory. The doorknob twisted behind him. Jessica stepped in without a word, grabbed a box of books, and was halfway out before catching Mike's eyes for the first time all day. Something flickered. Regret, exhaustion, maybe even fear. But she set her jaw and closed the door behind her. Mike let out a shaky breath and pressed his hand to his forehead. He wanted to shout, punch a wall, do anything to make the ache inside him subside, but all he could do was stand, rooted to the spot, wondering how a life could come apart so quietly. Tommy's voice echoed from last night. "Will I see you tomorrow, Dad?" And Mike's heart twisted. He'd sworn he'd never let his son down, but gut punch of losing the home. But this was something different. Inside the envelope were pages upon pages of careful accusations, printed in harsh, legalistic language that stripped away the sweetness of memory and replaced it with suspicion. Jessica was claiming he'd missed too many of Tommy's soccer games, that he'd shouted during arguments, that he'd forgotten birthday parties. 2 years ago, he had lost his temper when Tommy broke a neighbor's window. He remembered it, the hurt in the boy's eyes, his own shame. But was that neglect? Abuse, as the letter coldly suggested? Every sentence bored into his skull. Every word felt like a betrayal. He tried to picture Jessica writing these things, or sitting silently as her lawyer conjured up old arguments and spun them into weapons. Had she always seen him this way? When had he become a villain in their story? "Most of this is posturing," Mr. Halpern said gently, tapping the stack of papers. "It's common in custody cases. She's likely trying to build a case for primary custody." But Mike shook his head, unwilling, unable to accept that these were just tactics, just legal positioning. These were lies, or at best half-truths twisted out of context to make him look like a monster. His phone vibrated, a new message from Jessica. "I told you, Mike. I need to do what's right for Tommy. Please don't make this harder." Her words felt more like a warning than a plea. He thought back to last night, to Tommy's hopeful, "Good night, Dad." It seemed impossible now that Jessica could turn their son against him, that she would ever doubt his love for the boy. but the papers said otherwise. "I want to fight this," Mike said, his voice hoarse. "I have to. I can't let her take my son." Mr. Halpern nodded. Something in his eyes, sympathy perhaps, or just the tired wisdom of a man who's seen too many families break apart, softened his face. "You're not alone in this." Posture ramrod straight. Even the blue dress she wore felt like armor rather than an olive branch. She glanced at Mike, a quick impersonal flick, then turned away. Mr. Halpern murmured, "Stay calm. Let me do the talking." The hearing room was less dramatic than Mike expected. No creaking wood or thunderous gavel, just a plain room with a low dais and a judge who looked more tired than fearsome. Jessica's lawyer droned through introductions, her words clipped and rehearsed. Jessica herself sat rigid, thin lips pressed together, eyes fixed straight ahead. Mike tried to focus on Halpern's words, phrases like shared custody and active involvement, but they blurred together. He kept glancing at Jessica, searching for some sign, regret, forgiveness, the woman he married. But her face was a locked door. The lawyers volleyed back and forth, their words threading into official record. Jessica's attorney recited Mike's supposed failings, how he'd missed a recital, shouted in anger, worked too many late nights. Each claim stung worse than the last, even when Halpern countered, providing context, highlighting Mike's good intentions, his steady love for Tommy. The judge scribbled notes, stone-faced. Finally, the judge spoke directly to Mike. "Mr. Davis, do you have anything to add?" His throat closed for a moment, but Halpern nodded encouragement. "I love my son," Mike managed. "Whatever happened between Jessica and me, Tommy shouldn't have to lose either of us. I just want what's best for him." His confession seemed to hang in the air, fragile and unremarkable. The judge's eyes softened, just slightly. Then he set down his pen. "In the best interests of the child, I'm granting temporary primary custody to Mrs. Davis, with every other weekend visitation for Mr. Davis. We'll review the arrangement in 3 months." The words hit him like a punch. Jessica blinked, expression unreadable. It was over in minutes. The room emptied, leaving Mike staring at the wood-paneled walls, trying to catch his breath. Halpern's hand rested briefly on his shoulder, solid and reassuring. Outside the courtroom, Jessica brushed past without a word. Mike out of one last day before the work week. But now, Sundays meant goodbye. He waited in his car outside Jessica's new condo, the hours with Tommy dwindling as he rehearsed the same lines in his head. "Be strong. Don't make it harder for him. Don't show Jessica that you're falling apart." When Tommy finally bounded down the steps, Mike's chest ached with automatic happiness. The boy's backpack was too big for his narrow shoulders, but his smile was wide enough to make Mike forget, for a second, everything that had gone wrong. "Hey, kiddo," Mike said, trying for bright and steady, loading the bag into the back seat. "You ready for some burgers?" Tommy nodded, but something in his eyes had changed, wariness maybe, or uncertainty. Conversation during their afternoon together felt stilted, built on careful questions and shorter answers. When Mike asked about school, Tommy shrugged. When he tried to tease out plans for next weekend, Tommy's eyes drifted to the window. It was just before evening, the sky a fading watercolor, when he brought Tommy back to the condo. Jessica stood waiting on the steps, arms folded. Mike walked his son up, unwilling to let the minutes slip away. "Did you have fun?" she asked with that clipped, almost formal tone she'd used in court. Tommy nodded, and Mike bent down, pressing his lips to the crown of his son's head, anchoring himself in that tiny moment. Tommy hugged him tight, fingers digging into Mike's jacket, and for once, words failed them both. When the door clicked shut behind Tommy and Jessica, a heaviness pressed down on Mike's shoulders. Out in the car, he sat with the engine idling, breathing in the scent of burgers and kids' shampoo lingering in the upholstery. Monday mornings felt even emptier. At work, colleagues offered hesitant sympathy, then quickly looked away. At night, Mike washed Tommy's Superman mug and put it back on the shelf just in case. As the weeks went by, little things nagged at him. Tommy's texts got shorter. He forgot to mention his science project, skipped over soccer practice. When Mike asked about new friends, Tommy was evasive. "Mom says I shouldn't talk about her house," he admitted one Saturday morning, gaze fixed on his cereal. Mike forced a smile. "That's okay, bud. You tell me what you want to tell me." But something darker twisted ordinary conversation. The world hadn't just shifted because of the divorce. It seemed to recoil, closing off familiar lanes like a city under lockdown. He noticed it first at the grocery store, standing in line with microwavable dinners and the single loop of cartoon-themed yogurt, his attempt to keep the cupboards ready for Tommy's brief visits. Mrs. Lefkowitz from the building ahead of him, always quick with neighborhood gossip, scanned his cart and then sputtered a vague, "Oh, Mike. Hello." She glanced at her feet, pursed her lips, and didn't ask about Tommy. Word spread fast here. Divorce was one thing. Everybody knew someone who'd been through it, but losing custody, especially as a father, that came with a special kind of judgment. At the office, even normal pleasantries became hazards. Colleagues whispered and shot glances when they thought he wasn't looking. He caught snippets as they passed his cubicle. "Did you hear? His wife got the kid, right? I heard he lost it in court. Must have done something bad." Mike tried to lose himself in work, answering emails and churning out quarterly reports with the feverish desperation of a drowning man. But the silence at meetings was louder than before. Invitations for Thursday drinks dried up. When his team went out for lunch, he was left behind, the conversations tapering off if he wandered too close. Even his manager, normally all friendly dad jokes, started to speak to him with brittle, over-careful neutrality. The worst was at Tommy's soccer games. He would find a spot behind the chain-link fence, hands deep in jacket pockets. The other parents, couples who'd once come to his house for barbecue and birthday parties, gathered in tight knots of laughter and low voices. No one came over. Jessica would be there too, usually standing with a circle of mothers who all seemed to nod together when she spoke. Mike tried to wave at Tommy from the sideline, but sometimes the boy was too distracted, and the moments they used to share, halftime pep talks, post-game ice creams, felt like things he'd only dreamed. The isolation grew heavier as the days passed. Mike found himself rehearsing conversations in the shower, inventing ways to explain, to defend himself against rumors he could never quite refute. He wanted to shout, "I'm a good father. I never stopped loving my son." But the words stopped. Exhaustion. It was easier than pondering what he might do if this was how the rest of his life would feel. Each mile, each lonely lap, he tried to remember the sound of his son's laughter. Some nights that distant memory was the only thing that kept him running, kept him hoping he could still find a way back. A flicker of hope. Mike sat in the dim glow of his apartment, a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen table and his laptop open, the blue-white light of an email draft waiting for words that never came. Night covered the city outside, neon leaking through the blinds in fractured patterns. He'd meant to sleep, but hope, that stubborn, irrational thing, had curled itself in his chest, just enough to keep him awake for one more hour. The evening had begun like any other of late. He'd returned after work, dropped his keys with a sigh, and microwaved a bland dinner. Then his phone buzzed, a text from Tommy, earlier than usual. "Dad, can you help me with my science project?" Simple words, but like a sunbeam through winter fog. Mike wiped his hands, typed back, "Of course, call me when you're ready." It wasn't much, only a half-hour video call. Tommy's face scrunched in concentration, trying to describe a diorama about the water cycle. But it was new. He hadn't helped with homework since before the court order. Jessica's voice drifted in the background, sharp and hurried, but she didn't cut the call short. Instead, She even hovered for a moment, watching Tommy explain his little clay clouds and rivers before moving away. After they finished the project, Tommy lingered on screen. "Dad?" He hesitated, twisting a pencil between his fingers. "Can we go to the museum again, like before?" Mike smiled so wide it almost hurt. "We can ask your mom, but I'd love that, buddy, anytime." That night, after Tommy signed off, a small seed of hope took root. It wasn't just the conversation. It was the way Tommy looked at him, how he wanted his father's help, how maybe the gap walked that night. City lights twinkling above, he dared to believe maybe, if he fought hard and loved harder, he and his son could find their way back to each other. One hopeful moment at a time. Small victories. The first time Mike picked Tommy up after school, a September rain was falling, painting gray puddles on the cracked asphalt outside Maplewood Elementary. As he waited beneath the awning with the other parents, some busy on their phones, some chatting as if nothing in the world could shake their routines, Mike felt out of place, as if he'd wandered into a life that didn't entirely belong to him. When Tommy came out, his hair was damp, his backpack askew, his eyes flickering over the crowd until they landed on Mike. That shy half-smile Mike recognized, a mix of hope and uncertainty, cut through the morning's doubts. "Hey, Dad," Tommy said, slinging into his side for a hug that, to Mike, felt stronger than any judge's order. "Hey, champ, you hungry?" Mike asked, squeezing his son's shoulder. Tommy grinned. "Can we get fries?" They stopped at the corner diner, a place with sticky tables and red vinyl booths. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. For 40 magical minutes they were just father and son. They joked about teachers, deciphered the code of his spelling list, traded stories about favorite superheroes. Tommy's laughter, so absent for months, spilled out suddenly, unexpectedly, over a ketchup packet that burst the wrong way. They cleaned it up, both giggling, and Mike snapped a picture to save for later. A small moment, but a monument all the same. When they parted in the school parking lot, neither wanted to let go right away. Tommy hesitated, searching Mike's face. "This was fun," he said quietly. "Can we do it next week?" Mike's throat tightened. He nodded, blinking fast. "You can count on it, buddy." That night, Mike called his mother for the first time in weeks. She listened as he described picking up Tommy, the laughter, the fries, the way the old connection sparked and held. After became a new tradition. Fries on Fridays, then walks in the park, then help with fractions on the bus ride home. Small victories, but victories all the same. Mike learned that progress wasn't always visible to everyone, but when Tommy hugged him, sometimes fierce, sometimes uncertain, he knew he was building something new, brick by brick, moment by moment. He wasn't the man he used to be, but maybe, with enough of these small wins, he could become someone better, someone his son could always count on. Facing the past. The leaves had begun their slow drift to gold and crimson, blanketing the sidewalks where Mike now walked, lost in thought. Friday tradition had anchored his week. Tommy's smile, fries at the diner, the fresh, tentative rhythm of reconnection. Yet as routine crept in, so did memories, unbidden, unfinished. Sometimes, with a single question from Tommy, they would surface, jagged and raw. That afternoon, as they lingered over milkshakes, Tommy poked a puddle of condensation on the table. "Dad, why don't you and Mom talk much anymore?" Mike hesitated, the hum of the diner closing in. He fought the urge to smooth things over with a joke. Instead, he took a breath. Sometimes, when two people care about each other but don't see things the same way, it's healthier to give each other space. But it doesn't mean we love you any less. That will never change. Tommy seemed to consider this for a long moment, then nodded, content enough for now. Relief and sadness twisted in Mike's chest. Relief that he'd found words to bridge the gap. Sadness that such words were needed at all. That weekend, Mike found himself tidying the apartment, stacking Tommy's books, folding a jacket left on the couch, wiping fingerprints from the window glass. It was as if he could scrub away history with a bucket and rag, but the past clung to him, memories of raised voices, slammed doors, a growing loneliness even when Jessica still lived under the same roof. Late that night, an unexpected call broke the silence. Jessica. Her voice, soft yet distant, sounded nothing like the rigid figure from the courthouse. "I wanted to talk about the holidays," she said, but then seemed to falter. And hopes lost along the way. If neither of them could change the past, maybe it was forgiveness they needed most. If not for one another, then for themselves. The following week, Mike stood in front of the old house, a place he hadn't visited since the divorce. Leaves gathered in the corner of the porch, the paint a little more chipped. It was open house day at Tommy's school, and Jessica had asked if he wanted to walk over together. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel impossible. They walked the sidewalk side by side, awkward but not unkind. Inside the school, Tommy showed off his art projects, his classroom fortress of textbooks and drawings. "My dad helps me with science now," he told his teacher, voice proud. Mike saw the relief in Jessica's eyes, saw something like peace in the way she watched Tommy light up. As they left, Jessica turned to him. "I think we're getting better at this," she said, almost smiling. Mike looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. "I think so too." He knew the past would always be a part of him, etched into memory, a map of roads taken and abandoned. But now, alongside regret, ran the promise of something else. Forgiveness. And the chance to build something new, one honest moment at a time. New beginnings. Mike awoke to sunlight pooling across his bedroom floor, a tentative warmth that managed to slip past the city's cold autumn walls. He spent a long moment just breathing it in. For months, mornings had brought a bone-deep heaviness, a dread that tightened his chest before his feet even touched the floor. But now, change tinged the air, delicate as the blush of dawn. Saturday promised no grand adventure, just possibilities. A trip to the park, a new board game waiting for Tommy, and maybe, if the mood was right, the return of pancakes for breakfast. Mike hummed as he whisked the batter, remembering the way Tommy used to always sneak chocolate chips into every other scoop. He didn't have to wait squirrels. Tommy slipped his small hand into Mike's. "Dad, I like when it's just us sometimes. But I think Mom's okay too. Maybe we can all do something." Mike's heart squeezed. It was so simple, the way children forgave, the way they saw forward instead of backward. "Yeah, bud," he said softly. "Maybe we can." That afternoon, Jessica texted, inviting them both to a fall festival in the city park the next weekend. There was a time when such a thing would have made Mike tense, expecting silent wars and smiles stretched thin. But now, after weeks of old wounds dimming, he didn't feel trapped. Instead, he typed back, "We'd love to go," and meant it. The festival was crowded but lively. The three of them meandered through apple booths, watched amateur magicians, stopped to share a warm cider. They weren't a perfect family, not by any definition Mike had once clung to, but they were something new. Two parents trying, a child in between, all learning that okay didn't have to mean what it once did. As dusk settled, the air filling with laughter and the faint scent of cinnamon, Tommy tugged both their hands, insisting on one last ride on the carousel. Mike and Jessica sat side by side, and for the first time in a long while, their laughter mingled easily. On the walk home, they parted at the intersection. Jessica smiled, a real, grateful one. "Thank you, Mike." He watched her and Tommy walk away, feeling a deep, abiding peace. The grief would never fully disappear, but hope had returned, quietly, persistently. Each day offered a chance to build a different kind of future. And as Mike walked into the soft light of evening, he understood at last. New beginnings aren't always about starting over. Sometimes they're about learning to move forward together, each carrying the past, each willing to try again. The promise of tomorrow. The year had nearly circled back on itself. Autumn's crispness sharpened, and the scent of wood smoke and distant pumpkin pie drifted through the city. Mike found himself surveying the changing world, not with resignation, but with a composure he'd scarcely be. Tommy's wind-chapped grin. "Dad, Mom says hi," Tommy chirped, bounding inside, already tugging off his jacket. "She'll pick me up after breakfast tomorrow." Mike tousled his hair. "We've got big plans, buddy. Movie marathon, build your own pizzas, and I got the new board game you wanted." Tommy's eyes grew wide. "Really? Awesome!" As night fell, they curled on the couch, pizza boxes open, movies flickering on the screen. Tommy shrieked with laughter at cartoon antics, curling up under Mike's arm, safe and content. Later, after stories and whispered secrets, he fell asleep, a tangle of blankets and stuffed animals, his breath even and peaceful. Mike lingered a while, watching his son sleep. Each moment like this felt sacred, a testament to all the fights, all the fragile truces, all the small choices to show up again and again. He knew now that healing wasn't grand or quick. It was made of tiny gestures, of forgiveness offered in word and deed, of learning to look ahead even when the past tried to shadow the present. The next morning brought another ritual: pancakes, sleepy eyes, sunlight streaming in. Jessica arrived at the door, a gentle knock, her expression kind. They exchanged news, stories, even shared a quiet joke as Tommy hunted for his missing shoe. Mike noticed that Jessica seemed lighter too. Perhaps not the person he once knew, but no longer an adversary. Maybe, after all, they'd both been learning what it meant to let go without giving up. On the curb, Tommy hugged his dad tight. "See you Friday?" "Count on it," Mike said, voice steady and sure. As they disappeared down the block, Mike shut the door gently and stood in the soft hush of his apartment, feeling not emptiness, but hope. New traditions were blooming. Relationships once broken were mending, imperfect but honest. Mike let himself believe that the future wasn't something to dread, but a promise, one shaped by kindness, perseverance, and the enduring power of love. Outside, the city rolled forward, vibrant and out from behind, a voice he hadn't heard in nearly a year. "Mike!" He turned to see Dan, His old friend from college, waving as he jogged to catch up, snowflakes swirling in his wake. Dan looked much the same, stooped a little more perhaps, hair a little thinner, but with the same spark in his eyes. "Dan, man, it's been ages," Mike replied, surprised at the genuine warmth in his voice. They ducked into a nearby coffee shop, steam and holiday music greeting them as they found a seat. At first, conversation skated across the surface: work, headlines, the ridiculous price of rent. But Dan's gaze soon softened. "I heard about everything," Dan said quietly. "I should have called. I didn't know what to say, I guess." Mike smiled, the old pain duller now. "I get it. Honestly, there were days I didn't want to say anything, either. But I'm doing better. Tommy's doing better. It's complicated, but we're finding our way." To Mike's surprise, Dan listened without judgment, just nodding along, adding his own stories of struggle and disappointment, reminding Mike that life's troubles, while unique, were rarely solitary. At the end, Dan squeezed Mike's shoulder. "Let's not lose touch again. Call me if you ever want to vent, or let me show Tommy how to lose at chess sometime." Mike left the cafe lighter, warmed not just by coffee, but by the slow, careful return of friendship. The weekend with Tommy felt like turning a new page. They built an entire city out of Legos, crafted paper snowflakes for the windows, and went ice skating for the first time. Mike wobbled across the rink, arms flailing, much to Tommy's delight. Between laughter and tangled scarves, Mike learned to enjoy small failures. As long as they were together, falling was just another way to stand up again. Jessica joined them for hot chocolate afterward, hesitant at first, but eventually joining the laughter at Mike's awkwardness on skates. The atmosphere was almost easy, lighter than anything Mike had dared to hope during the long, lonely nights of last spring. City noise, turning familiar corners into quiet mysteries. Tommy pressed his face against the window in wide-eyed wonder, shrieking at the sight of thick flakes tumbling past streetlights. "What if we never have to go to school again?" He joked, nose leaving cloudy shapes on the glass. Mike laughed, ruffling Tommy's hair. "Let's not get too lucky, champ, but I think today calls for something special. Want to help me make snowmen out back?" Bundled in mismatched gloves, boots, and hats, they tumbled into the courtyard, the world new under the shroud of snow. Tommy's cheeks flushed red with laughter as he heaved piles of snow into lopsided shapes, Mike doing his best to help, though their snowman ended up with crooked eyes and a grin made of bent twigs. Mike snapped a picture, promising to send it to Jessica, who messaged back within minutes. "I love it. Save some snow for when I'm off work." Afterward, Mike brewed cocoa. Tommy, hoarse from the cold and the laughter, curled in with his favorite blanket and a book. Mike glanced at the boy, trying to memorize the image. Peaceful, strong, somehow older than just a few months before. There was a knock at the door. Mike opened it and blinked in surprise. Mrs. Patel, their neighbor, stood there, arms full of grocery bags. "Snow's got my door stuck. Would you mind?" she asked, breathless but smiling. "Of course. Hang on. I'll be right over," Mike replied, pulling on his coat. Tommy insisted on coming, so the three of them shuffled down the hall. Mike braced against the stuck door, finally wrenching it free while Tommy helped bring in the groceries. Inside, Mrs. Patel fussed over them, insisting they stay for spiced tea and cookies. "I've lived here 30 years. I've never seen snow quite like this," she said, pouring tea with practiced hands. "You're good boys. Don't forget, kindness gets us through the long winters." The world outside was changing. Mike could feel it, 1,000 tiny adjustments threading through his days. Kindness, he realized, wasn't just about the grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations. It was in these ordinary moments, helping a neighbor, listening,